let's get into this story about Rachel Maddow. Now, you all know I'm not a fan of Rachel Maddow. I'm pretty sure you guys are not either, or most of you probably are not a fan of Rachel Maddow. Now, she was notorious for being a Russiagator. She's notorious for promoting war that suits her interests and suits the narrative for MSNBC. And we're not here to say that there isn't going to be moments where commentators don't get things wrong. I'm not here to say there isn't a moment when journalists don't get things wrong. But what I am here to say is that when you realize that you were wrong, you come back and do your due diligence and you apologize for the statements that you made. You retract your statement. I have yet to see Rachel Maddow do that in reference to Russiagate and some of the other things that she said. And now you have to understand that Rachel Maddow is now on a book tour. So there's been a lot of books popping up this week, but she's on a book tour. So she's been doing several interviews, right? And so this event that Jose Vega and Russell went to, Rachel Maddow is, of course, the featured speaker, I believe. Ben Stiller is also on the stage with her as well. You know, it's this is weird. This is weird. But I feel like if it's someone that you are going to confront, particularly about Russiagate and warmongering, that is in media, mainstream media, I think Rachel is probably one of those people you're probably going to want to have a talk to. Now, before we get into what happened with that confrontation, I want to take you back to, I think it was a couple of months ago when this confrontation happened with Jose Vega, when he confronted journalists from the Washington Post. This is to show you again that obviously, you know, Jose is not just confronting politicians. He's also confronting media personalities, commentators, and journalists that have also gotten the facts wrong and they have not corrected their information, which again, I think is very important. You need to correct the lies that you told. So I want to take you back to this moment when he confronted journalists from the Washington Post and the LA Times about the lies that they told in reference to war and Julian Assange. Let's start with this.
Oh, is this the lecture hall with Seymour Hersh? I'm looking for the one with Seymour Hersh because it's a policy and press hall event. So shouldn't we be talking about the Nord Stream since that's the biggest story of the century? And you guys, you know, I'm sorry. I mean, you have the executive editor of the New York Times there who came out with a phony story to try and block Seymour Hersh. It's just kind of funny how that happened, you know? I mean, did you even acknowledge Seymour Hersh?
So he's referring to that article that Seymour Hersh wrote where he said that, you know, about the Nord Stream pipeline, who actually blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. So he's referring to that article. And after that article was released, some of these journalists from the New York Times and Washington Post and the LA Times, they smeared Seymour Hersh. By the way, Seymour Hersh is a renowned journalist. He was also the one that covered the massacre that happened in Vietnam. So he also uncovered stories about Richard Nixon. This is not someone that just became a journalist a year ago. He's very much admired and I would say beloved in journalism space for his investigative journalism. But all of a sudden, because he was talking about the Nord Stream pipeline in a way that mainstream media was not allowed to do so, and he's independent, the mainstream media outlets decided to attack Seymour Hersh. So the question that Jose had is, if this is a journalist event, why isn't Seymour Hersh here? Why aren't you giving him the opportunity to respond in reference to the article that he wrote? And then also, why aren't you guys willing to respond for the smear tactics that you did and the narrative that you had about not just the Ukraine war, but other wars in general?
All of you are executive editors of papers that broke Pentagon, My Lai, Watergate. Is this the same papers or not? I mean, is there anything you've gotten right in the last 20 years, or am I mistaken about that? I mean, it's just kind of funny because Iraq, wrong. Syria, wrong. Russiagate, really wrong. Okay, I mean, the list goes on and on. So the last thing you could do to try and actually fix your reputation is acknowledge that through leaks, we had to find out that Zelensky was going to bomb Moscow on the anniversary. I mean, if you're so impartial, shouldn't you at least say right, that Zelensky was going to bring us on the verge of World War III? That seems pretty fair. While Julian Assange rots in prison, all of you got, fat checks because he's in jail for doing your job. And you know what? Tucker Carlson ain't no Seymour Hersh, but he did something you guys are scared to do. Speak the truth and actually be critical of the war, which is why he was actually fired from Fox, because you are all cowards, every single one of you. None of you have actually had any relevancy. And you know what? The mainstream press is now dying.
Let's pause at that point right there where he says the mainstream press is dying. It's true. I mean, when you work for the mainstream news outlets, the problem is you have an editor. And whatever story you write or you think you're writing, the editor has to approve it. And if the editor doesn't approve it, it doesn't get through. This is why some people have left mainstream media and decided to be independent, because they don't want their words censored, right? They don't want to have to go through editors to say what they need to say. This is why Substack, I think, is so valuable, right? So these are important points that he's bringing up. And it is true. Mainstream press is dying. And by the way, they're all aware of this. The Rachel Maddows, right? Like they're all aware that mainstream media is dying. That's why they are all writing books. You notice this? They're finding other ways to make money, but more people are willing to seek out independent media because they want the truth. They don't want a narrative that is spoon-fed to them.
Nobody's ever going to listen to you again. You have no credibility with the public. The only people who care about what you have to say are elite assholes who have nothing productive to say anymore, and it's dying off. So will you at least say something, either about Nord Stream or Ukraine or the fact that Zelensky brought us to the verge of World War III, and the only reason we knew about that was through leaks? Go ahead. It's a free speech event, right? You guys are the press. Let's say something here. Mr. Khan, come on. You're the executive editor of the New York Times,
So what you have to understand is, like, these people sitting up on the stage, these are not your, working class, beat journalist. Things are different now. Like, now to get those positions, to get a position at the New York Times or especially the Washington Post, you have to come from like this elite background. Either you got to come from the elite schools, you got to know somebody in there. Maybe your parent worked for that outlet or something like that. Like, you already have to have those connections. And it's really hard for people that have gone to public universities to get those positions at those networks now. And I think that's what people have to understand. Like, these people are well off. These are not the people going knocking on doors and saying, hey, can I get a story from? These people are well off, and they are used to speaking to people that are in the similar situations that they're in. They're used to being in those types of circles. So when someone like Jose stands up and says what he says, like, notice how they're not even trying to push back. They're not actually denying anything that he's saying. They're just sitting there. They're comfortable.
I'm just trying to get into some good trouble here, man. Woo. Listen, Karen, get out of my face for a second. I got to talk to these gentlemen. Okay. Well, I just want to hear what they have to say. Go ahead. I'm done.
Wait your turn.
You're not going to tell them to you. Come.
Wait your turn.
You could project if we can't.
I would just say I think it's important to hear everybody's point of view.
Yeah.
So thank you.
All right.
I do think that we need to give our moderator a chance to ask other questions.
We're on the verge of World War III.
We're not doing that. Also do so. Thank you. Really, thank you.
Say something about this bombing. We blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Listen, don't stand there while there are people rotting in prison. Nobody said anything about Uhuru, right? The socialists who are in jail for being critical of this war. God damn it.
Let's go.
At least say something about the people in jail for being critical of this war. They don't deserve to be in prison right now.
You know, what's interesting to me too, because a lot of times you'll see that the liberal media, the liberal outlets, they claim they care so much about Black people and Black lives, but they didn't say anything about the Uhuru movement, those members being arrested and interrogated by the DOJ. Not one word. I think the only person I remember covering was Tucker Carlson, of all people. But now we're going to fast forward to present tense, and we're going to see Jose is at it again. And this time he is actually confronting Rachel Maddow, Miss Rusher Gator herself. It says, my friend Russell Dobler, how do you say Russell's last name? Dobler? Russell Dobler. And I confronted neocon Maddow at her book reading event. I was dragged on the ground for speaking the truth about her being a warmonger and the truth about ethnic cleansing in Gaza by the Israelis and how she's getting it wrong, just like in 2016. And I'm going to show you some of those times when she got it wrong. Listen to this.
Rachel, I'd rather not listen to your boring book because you are here to get Israel wrong yet again. Just like you got 2016 wrong yet again. All you are is the biggest warmonger.
So let's go back. So he said, Rachel, I would rather not sit here and listen to your boring book. So like I said, Rachel Maddow is on a book tour. This is what she's doing. She's going into this venue and she's speaking to these people. And I want you to pay attention to the crowd, because I want you to see this is who listens to this stuff. Look at the crowd. Look. How many younger, look who's in the crowd. How many younger people are in the crowd besides Jose? Right? So you see, this is going to show you again who's actually engaged with mainstream media these days, right? There's not a lot of younger people that are paying attention to people like Rachel Maddow, but I loved it because he started off and said, I don't want to listen to your boring book.
Rachel, I'd rather not listen to your boring book because you are here to get Israel wrong yet again. Just like you got 2016 wrong yet again.
What's interesting to me is that some of the people in the crowd, particularly the older people, some of these people were around for Woodstock. Some of them were around for like the hippie days, like, you know, peace, love, and sleep with whatever and whoever you want. Some of them were around for those days and some of them participated in those things. And it's interesting that now it's like, oh my God, you saw the look on the woman's face. She was like, oh, thinking to herself, like, how dare he stand up and say such things? No, don't even try, boo, because I saw some of the videos from the 60s and the early 70s, and some of you were having a lot of fun. A little too much fun, more fun than me. Okay. It's funny how people forget, like, as they get older. And now, so you see some of those people that came from like that era that were around for like Woodstock and Be Free and Free Your Mind and all that jazz. Now, like, as they've gotten older, it's like some of them have become really like prudish and elite. It's like, what happened to you, man? What happened to peace, love, and let everything be free?
All you are is the biggest warmonger. You and the rest of the media are the biggest warmongers ever. Why is it that other countries are calling for peace? Brazil, Russia, India, and China all call for peace.
It's all boomers up in this thing, man. Look at the crowd. Look at the crowd. So he's saying, like, why aren't you ever calling for peace? All you do is push and promote war.
From the United Nations. And what do? You're just a big, ugly face. You're a warmonger. All of you are just straight warmongers. That's right. Look at what they do to free speech. There's an ethnic cleansing in Gaza. And all you do is tell lies about it. You and the rest of the media are warmongers. Every single one of you are all warmongers.
Bye-bye.
Look at this. You see how they dragged Jose out? You see how they
I don't know, but I had a feeling when we were talking about somebody was not happy about something.
And this is the other thing. Why are there thrones for chairs? What the hell is this shit? What is this? Is this a chair or is this a throne? Oh boy.
He was one of the most successful and celebrated industrialists on the planet.
You see, because they think that people like Rachel Maddow, they think that this woman's like golden, you know, like they think like, oh my God, it's Rachel Maddow from MSNBC. We need to go hear about her book. Now, it wasn't just Jose, because Russell also spoke out. If this isn't Ben Stiller, it sure as hell looks like Ben Stiller. It does look like him. Did Russell say anything about? No, he didn't say who it was. Okay, but here's Russell. Now he interrupts.
Beyonce. Rachel, would you consider Benjamin Netanyahu an authoritarian foreign leader?
Sit down.
Can you please answer that?
We're not here to
Would you
talk to
consider Netanyahu a dangerous authoritarian foreign leader?
Is that Ben Stiller? That does look like Ben Stiller, right? What's that, Jay? That is him, Sabby. I thought that was him. Why is he there? Like, what is this? Oh my God. Do you see what I mean? This is what I was saying. Like, a lot of people in mainstream media, they're so out of touch with everyday people. They're out of touch with the working class. Rachel Maddow's up here sipping coffee or tea, whatever's in that mug, with Ben Stiller, and avoiding the everyday people who have legitimate questions about her work as a commentator on MSNBC. I'm not going to say journalist. Legitimate questions. This is look who they in company with. A hot mess. And she'll never answer the questions because she won't get the opportunity to write another book.
Authoritarian foreign leader. Will you answer that? Will you stand up for the Muslim anchors at MSNBC who have been...
That's the part they don't want to talk about. They don't want to talk about, and look, I got many criticisms of Mehdi Hassan, but they don't want to talk about Mehdi Hassan and the other two journalists that their shows have just basically just kind of fallen off the air. And MSNBC thought that people wouldn't notice that, and people did notice it. That's your network, Rachel. You don't have anything to say about your colleagues basically being silenced?
Muslim anchors at MSNBC who have been taken off the air. Will you speak for them? Will you speak up for them? What do you call a country that bombs people in a hospital? Is that fascism? Do you only see fascism when it's wearing a red hat? Yeah.
So that's a good question. Do you only see fascism when it's wearing a red hat? Because I would say silencing those commentators on MSNBC, isn't that a form of fascism? Not allowing these people to speak, just basically making them disappear, and as if nobody would notice. As vocal as Mehdi Hassan is, you think people really would not notice? Now we're going to look at the present and we're going to go to the past. Because here is Rachel Maddow here in this interview, which is on MSNBC, but a different commentator. And they're interviewing her again. I told you, she's going around promoting this book. They're talking to her about Gaza. And listen to this.
I wish you were sitting here, not me. It's so fraught. It's so heartbreaking. You think about everything that you hear. I take Mary Eisen's point. I think she's still with us, that these are the images that a terrorist nation wants out there. I take John Hudson and Raf's point that, John Hudson's reporting that 6,000 bombs have been dropped on a teeny space, with tons of civilians there in harm's way, put in harm's way by Hamas. And I wonder what your sort of thoughts are about how we sift through this.
Well, I think if you look at...
So notice she said civilians put in harm's way, right? Okay, listen to this.
What's happened at that hospital, there is nobody there's nobody among us. There's nobody in the civilized world who would want to happen what happened to that hospital.
Let me debunk that. Okay, let me tell you how she lied. It's happened before. This isn't the first time where they've bombed hospitals. It's happened before. So it's interesting to me the way that I've heard like some of the commentators discuss this issue as if this is the first time this has happened. It's not the first time it's happened.
To have people, to have a place where it's an operating hospital. This is a place where there's patients there, there's wounded people there, in addition to people sheltering there. Now, why did that happen at that hospital? We don't know. And I think we can't underscore that enough. We have a clear assertion from the Israeli side. We do not categorically target hospitals, and we have a counter explanation as to what the strike could have caused that strike. Mm-hmm.
So she's lying again. I just told you it's happened before. People like Rachel Maddow, they're just a mouthpiece for the State Department. That's why they're in those positions. Her and that woman in the red, whoever she is, that's why they're in those positions. That's why they can have those jobs. That's why she can go do this book tour. Her, Anderson Cooper, that couple, Joe and Mika, whoever the hell they are, on Morning Joe. These people they're just mouthpieces. There's a reason why there's a reason why the furthest left voice that you will actually see in liberal media is Mehdi Hassan. And even Mehdi Hassan will tell you to vote for Joe Biden. You see what I mean? They only want to go so far. They only want to go so far. You look at someone like Mark Lamont Hill, who actually is a socialist. He used to work at CNN. The moment he had that interview about Israel and Palestine, and he pushed back on the rhetoric, gone. CNN was like, you got to go. So the furthest left voice that you have now in liberal media is Mehdi Hassan. And like I said, even he'll tell you to vote for Joe Biden.
It's Palestinian Islamic Jihad, a misfired rocket essentially that was targeted at Israel and somehow hit that hospital instead. On the other side, we've got Palestinian authorities saying, no, this was an Israeli airstrike. We cannot lose sight of the fact that in the Gaza Strip, the government is Hamas. There isn't a governing authority that we're able to appeal to here that may have a more neutral understanding of this than the entity that launched those terrorist attacks in Israel last weekend, and that is at war with Israel right now. And so, I mean, that's...
Notice how she talks about appealing to people. So she said that we are able to appeal to. My push on this is I've been saying from day one, and I've said with other conflicts as well, the United States government shouldn't be making any decisions at all in reference to this. This should not be a U.S. government issue, but it is, because the U.S. likes to poke their nose in places where it doesn't really belong and where they're not always welcome. But they feel like it's their right to do so. And because the U.S. government does have that allyship with Israel. But even when they don't have an allyship with the country, they still intervene when it's really not their place to do so. So this whole idea of people, that government is not willing to negotiate or with us. What do you mean with us? Because the conflict is not, this is again, what I've said before about people having this idea that the U.S. government is the U.S. government's role to tell other countries what they can and cannot do, and to tell other countries which leaders they can and cannot have.
That's why I asked Raf that question about whether or not U.S. intelligence has anything substantive to add to the factual understanding here. When you look at protests breaking out in the West Bank and outside the Israeli embassy in Amman, as our last guest was just telling us, and indeed in lots of places in the region right now, those protests are breaking out because of the perception that this was a deliberate Israeli airstrike targeting that hospital on purpose.
The protests broke out before the hospital attack. There were already protests before the hospital attack. This is what she's leaving out. I showed you guys this the past couple of days, all the protests that were happening over the world. Now, don't you think it's interesting that there are all of the global protests that have been happening on behalf of no genocide for the Palestinian people? Don't you think it's interesting that you don't see that same global movement backing Israel? And this is not to say there aren't some out there protesting. There are counter protests as well, but nothing like on the scale what you've seen of those who are out there fighting for the Palestinian people. Don't you think that says something, guys? That says that the world sees what's happening. The world is well aware of what's going on. And the world also sees that the U.S. government even with a Democrat president, is willing to back and defend and protect a far right wing leader in Israel. And this is the push that I would give. If you're one of those people where you're on the fence, you don't really know where you fit in this equation, you don't know what side you're on, or you're on the fence in reference to voting. If you're trying to decide whether or not you feel like you need to vote for Joe Biden because you might get Trump, I told you they're both corporate. I told you they're both corrupt. Here's something I want you to think about. Regardless if it is Biden or Trump that's in office at this point in time, both presidents would be backing the state of Israel. Both presidents would be defending Netanyahu and would be backing Netanyahu. We've already seen both of them do it. Now, this is where third parties come in. When people tell me there's no other option, there are other options. So if this is an important issue to you, that's something to think about. That's something to think about. Now, and then there's also this other thing that I want to address as well. When we talk about the protests that are happening across the world, mainstream media is losing their grip on the narrative with this particular conflict. And I've never seen anything like this before in reference to wars this early on. Because even when it came to the Iraq war, some people got it right early in the beginning, but for the most part, most people didn't. Right? Most people didn't. That's just a reality. When it came to Russia and Ukraine, a lot of people were wrong in the beginning, but more people, I think, even have woken up to that. But this is the first one that I've seen within my adult life where people have caught on right from the beginning. And I think mainstream media doesn't know what to do with that. They have lost the plot. They're like, holy crap, what do we do? What do we do about the letter that was written by the Harvard students? How could these kids think this way? We're not controlling them enough. They're actually starting to use their freaking brains. Why are all these people out protesting in the street? What are they doing? What are they talking about? How could this have happened? It happened because people started moving away from mainstream media because you guys have lied about several conflicts, including the Iraq war. It happened because more people have started to seek out independent media. And it happened because guess what, boo? Back in my day, back when I was growing up, and particularly when I was in college, we did not have a Facebook. We didn't have social media. And now people are able to see these images instantly and not wait for the news to try to twist it and bend it into whatever pretzel they want it to be to fit the State Department narrative. That's what's happening. And they don't know what to do. They can't handle it. They don't know what to do. Listen, one of my students told me this before. They said, everything that I learned in this program, no offense to you or anything, but I could have learned all of this on the internet for free. One of my students told me that. I was like, well, damn. But I couldn't be mad at them because the reality is it's true. Everything that they learned in that program, they actually could have just learned via Google and for cheaper. They don't know how to get a handle on it.
You have to believe, we as humans have to believe that the truth matters. We do not want that to be true. Israel says that was not true. An investigation needs to be done to find out if it was true. But you have to believe, you can't say it doesn't matter what the truth is here. And you can't say the street will erupt no matter what, regardless of what the truth is here. The truth does matter. It's the only thing that we have. It's the only way that we can be morally held accountable for our actions.
We're going to stop it there. I can only take so much of her, and I got to show you a past video. So she said that the truth does matter, coming from someone who lied about Russiagate for years. And I want to take you to another lie that she told. Now, this was in reference to the Rage Against the War Machine rally. So after this event, I went on to Rising to talk about it. Of course, Rachel Maddow was one of the first to smear the rally. Here she is lying again. I told you, she's just a paid mouthpiece.
And I mean, truly random rally on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. A rally in support of Russia, I guess, with all.
No, that was the first lie. The rally was not in support of Russia. Yes, there were some people with Russia flags. There were people with all different kind of flags. Also saw Ukraine flags. The rally was to call for peace. to get us out of this conflict, to move us further away from the possibility of a World War III. That's what the rally was about. Unlike Rachel, I was actually there. I covered the event. You can see it on my channel. So I know what the rally was about. That was the first lie. She goes on.
Given all the Russian flags, at least a rally against the U.S. supporting Ukraine in trying to stand up against the Russian invasion of their country. That's
another lie. It was not against the U.S. support of Ukraine to stand up against the Russian invasion. It was for a call for peace.
A tiny event. It was small. It was a weird assemblage of Americans. There were Proud Boys there.
If it was a tiny event and if it was small, then why were you covering it on MSNBC? She goes on to say there were Proud Boys there. I didn't see no Proud Boys there. And I was right there in the center where the media space was, so I could see the entire crowd.
For some of the white supremacist groups you'd recognize from the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville a few years ago, also represented prominently the remains of the bizarre Lyndon LaRouche cult. There were a lot of people with Russian flags, also the occasional flag of the former Soviet Union.
There weren't a lot of people with Russian flags. I only saw 2 Russian flags, and I also saw Ukraine flags. And those who have the flags from the Soviet Union, if I remember correctly, I believe this was Caleb Maupin's group that brought those flags. And they actually did, which they bring to every event that they have, but they did actually apologize after the fact, after they were criticized for this.
Also, at least one person who guest hosts for Tucker Carlson on the Fox News channel was there as a featured speaker.
So she pretends like she doesn't know Tulsi Gabbard's name. She just says someone who guest hosts for Tucker Carlson. It was just stuff like this. It was just,
There were anti-vaccine conspiracy theorists, a lot of them. There were cryptocurrency promoters. It was a really weird group. It was a small.
How do you know there's a lot of them? Like, that was the part that really, she wasn't even there. But this is what Rachel does best. Lies, lies, and lies. So yeah, I went on to Rising to talk about that because that was just it was a hot mess. But with mouthpieces like Rachel Maddow, this is how the narrative doesn't change. And that's why we said you need that movement on the outside to shake things up. And that's what you see happening now. Valerie, Sabby Sabs, my mom loves you. We both do. Bless and thank you for what you do, sister. Thank you so much, Valerie. That's really sweet. Thank you, P. Smith. Abby Hoffman killed himself because his buddies sold out. I don't know, Abby P. You'll have to let me know about who this person is. But thank you for the super chat. Thank you for the super sticker, Nelson. Miss Pamela says, Nicole Wallace equals woman in red dress. Thank you, Miss Pamela. Thank you for the super chat, Perry. Did you see Jewish Americans demonstrating for Palestine in the halls of Congress yesterday? We're getting into that story, Perry. We're getting there, Perry. And thank you for the super chat, P. Smith. Rachel Maddow was born on April Fool's Day. I kid. I don't know.